The frost clung to my boots as I stepped into the empty field, the wind carrying whispers of a long-forgotten secret. Something beneath the frozen earth called to me, a weight of both hope and fear. I didn't know that uncovering it would change everything I thought I knew about my family. When Sterks pursues, it was the quietest winter I had ever known, the kind where even the crows seemed to pause mid-flight. I had returned to my childhood town after years away, drawn by a letter that hinted at secrets left by my late grandfather. The fields that once felt endless now seemed claustrophobic under a gray sky, yet the air was electric with anticipation. I wasn't expecting to uncover anything tangible, just memories, regrets, and ghosts of the past. The envelope had been sitting on my doorstep for hours, or maybe days. I didn't notice it until the wind nudged it against my boot, plain, no stamp, no name. Just a folded piece of paper inside, edges curled and yellowed. I remember picking it up and feeling the weight of it, heavier than any ordinary letter. I sat on the top step, boots still damp from the early frost. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the heater inside. Outside, the world was soft with winter light, gray and thin. It made the envelope feel more alive somehow, like it had waited just for me. I didn't want to open it, but my hands betrayed me. The note inside was small, the paper brittle. The handwriting trembled, uneven letters, some smudged by age or hurried nerves. "The field remembers," it began. "Beneath the frozen earth, what you seek waits, nothing more." No name, no signature, just the curl of the last line fading like breath in cold air. I held it in both hands and felt a strange pull, a tug in my chest that I hadn't felt since childhood. My grandfather's voice came back, quiet and deliberate. He never shouted, he never explained things fully. He spoke slowly, as if each word carried the weight of years he didn't trust anyone to understand. I remembered the way he paused before every sentence, waiting for me to catch up, waiting for me to see what he saw. I wondered if this was his way of speaking to me one last time. Or maybe it was a trick, a game he always played with riddles and half-truths. My chest tightened. Was it hope I felt, or dread? The room smelled faintly of pine and old books, the remnants of a winter I had spent here long ago. I traced the lines of the letter with my finger, the paper rough against my skin. The ink looked like it might flake off if I breathed too hard. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. I imagined him there, standing in the snow, smiling quietly, hands buried in pockets, waiting to see if I would follow. I paced the kitchen, the letter crumpled in my hand, thinking of the field at the edge of town. I hadn't been back in years. The field was empty, endless, frozen under gray skies. I could see it in my mind, my boots sinking slightly in the frost, the bare trees standing like sentinels. I wondered if anything could survive under that winter blanket, if the earth held more than ice and mud. My grandfather's stories flooded back. He spoke often of hiding things, of leaving small traces behind. Sometimes coins, sometimes old tools. Once, I remembered, a carved wooden box buried beneath the barn floorboards. He never told me why, only that some things were meant for the patient, or the brave, or the curious. And I stared at the letter for a port and a pound of con pounds of verplek. I stared at the letter for what felt like hours. Outside, the world went on without notice. A crow landed on the fence and pecked at the snow. Its black feathers glimmered wet against the gray. I felt that same crow in my chest, something dark and restless, waiting to know if I would act. I thought about what it meant to follow instructions from someone who had passed away. Was it closure I sought, or just answers? Did he intend for me to find something tangible, or only to walk the field and remember? The paper trembled slightly in my hands. I wasn't sure if it was mine or the letters. I pressed it to my chest. My heartbeat sounded loud in the quiet room. The walls felt closer than usual, like they were listening, waiting for me to make a choice. I thought about knocking on the neighbors' doors, asking if anyone had received a letter like this. But the thought felt absurd. The field, the letter, the trembling ink, they were mine alone. Night fell soft and thick, shadows pooled in the corners of the kitchen. I traced the words again, reading and rereading, trying to understand if it was a test, a warning, or just a final whisper. The handwriting shook in a way that made it feel alive, as if he had written it while afraid someone might take it away before I read it. Memories surfaced unbidden, him sitting in the rocking chair, the way he hummed softly when he thought no one was listening, the smell of wood smoke curling in the corner of the room. I remembered feeling small, waiting for his stories to unfold, feeling the weight of his eyes, and the pauses between words that always held more than what was spoken. I wondered if he had meant for me to feel the same now, the waiting, the small ache of uncertainty, the quiet pull of something hidden just beyond reach. I folded the letter slowly and placed it in my coat pocket. Outside, snow had begun to fall, thin flakes that melted on my eyelashes. The street was empty, my breath fogged in the cold air. I thought about walking to the field tonight, but part of me hesitated. The letter was a key, yes, but what door would it open? And would I be ready to see what lay beneath the frozen earth? I pressed my hands into my pockets and felt the paper shiver against my skin. Curiosity and unease tangled like brambles in my chest. I could almost hear him whispering through the wind, soft and careful, "Go. See. Remember." And so I stood at the edge of the porch, snow settling on my hair, and wondered if this winter would be like any other, or if it would be the one that changed everything. The envelope waited, patient and unassuming, for me to decide, and I realized with a slow ache in my chest that I wanted to follow, but only a little for now. Ku ken fure. The tires crunched over frost-bitten gravel, each sound sharper than I remembered. Snow dusted the edges of the road like powdered sugar, softening the familiar shapes of my childhood town. Houses stood quiet, windows dark, shutters closed, as if they were holding their breath. The world felt smaller somehow, tighter, like it had shrunk in my absence. I gripped the steering wheel a little too hard, feeling the cold metal through my gloves. My chest felt heavy with a mixture of nostalgia and unease. I hadn't driven this route in years. Each bend in the road brought back memories I hadn't thought about in decades. The corner store where I bought penny candies, the old oak at the playground that now leaned crooked in the snow, and the small creek that ran just behind my grandfather's house. The letter burned in my coat pocket. I could feel it pressing against my ribs, a constant reminder that I had promised, even to myself, to uncover what had been left for me. It was more than a note, it was a whisper from the past, a tether pulling me home. I could almost hear my grandfather's voice in the hum of the tires. Don't forget, see what waits. Passing the field at the edge of town made my chest tighten. The trees there were skeletal, stripped bare by winter, casting long shadows over frozen grass. I remembered summers spent running through that same field, laughing, breath misting in the air, feeling endless under the sun. Now it looked different. The snow flattened it, the frost hardened it. The field was still the field, but it wasn't mine anymore. Or maybe it was mine, and I had changed. The streetlights flickered as I drove past the church I used to walk to on Sunday mornings. Its steeple was dusted with snow, serene and distant. The sidewalks were empty, the streets silent. I realized I hadn't noticed how quiet the town had become. No children shouting, no doors opening, no familiar smell of bakery bread drifting into the cold air. Just me. And the weight of returning. I parked outside my old house. It had changed in small ways. An Ulster coat of paint for Ontair and Neverments. A new coat of paint here, a broken step patched over there. But it carried the same smell in the air. Wood smoke, old pine, the faint trace of my grandfather's cologne in the corner of the living room. I sat there for a long time, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at the door I used to run through as a child. I could feel the quiet pulse of the house, like it remembered me. I stepped out into the snow, boots sinking slightly, leaving deep impressions that disappeared as the wind brushed them over. The air was crisp, sharp, and smelled like frost and earth. I drew the letter from my pocket, feeling the ridges of the handwriting, the uneven tremble of ink that had survived decades. I touched it gently, as if it might break. Hey. I thought of the promises I had never made, the ones I had whispered in the dark of my bedroom as a boy, the ones I had kept buried until now. The field, the letter, the return home, all of it felt like a reckoning I had invited myself into, whether I was ready or not. Could it really hold more than memories? Or was it just the way the past looked when it was frozen in winter? I walked slowly toward the field, boots crunching through the frost. The snow was thin, revealing faint blades of grass, the uneven rise of the land beneath. Each step echoed quietly in the emptiness. I remembered hiding here as a child, watching the horizon blur with afternoon light, imagining the world stretched endlessly beyond these fences. Now the horizon was gray, distant, unyielding. I felt smaller somehow, like I had returned too late. I paused at the edge, looking at a single tree that had always been my marker. Its branches were bare, icicles hanging like delicate ornaments. I reached out, touching the bark with my gloved hand. The cold bit through my glove, and I shivered. My fingers tingled, but I didn't move. I just stood there, listening to the wind, listening to the field, listening to myself. The wind carried a faint sound of something moving under the snow, maybe an animal, maybe nothing at all. I crouched, brushing my hand over a patch of frozen earth. My palm left a mark that quickly disappeared under the light dusting of snow. It was the first contact with the place that had once been endless and familiar. The field was waiting, patient, quiet, and indifferent. I thought of my grandfather again. He had loved this field. He had walked it in all seasons, leaving traces only he could recognize. Maybe that was the point, to see if I could find them, to see if I could remember what he knew without asking. Maybe the letter was a test, a message, a final attempt at connection. I straightened, brushing snow from my coat. The town behind me seemed unreal, like a diorama frozen in white. I felt the ache of returning, the strange mixture of comfort and displacement. My footsteps in the snow felt like small confessions, evidence that I had come back, that I had answered something I hadn't fully understood. The letter felt heavier now, not in weight, but in meaning. It was more than paper. It was a pulse of memory, a tether between what was and what could be. I slid it back into my coat pocket and let my hand rest there. I looked out across the field one last time before heading back to the car. The light was fading, pale and soft, turning the snow into a wash of silver and gray. I could almost hear him there, just beyond the reach of sight. Not a voice, not a figure, just a presence, quiet and steady, waiting to see if I would return. I turned toward the street, toward the house I had left, and felt the cold seep into my bones. The town slept under the snow, the windows shuttered, the world quiet. But the field remained awake, patient, and waiting. I knew I would be back. And I knew that when I returned, the promise of the letter and what lay beneath the frozen earth would demand I see it fully. The field stretched out before me, gray and quiet, the first light of dawn brushing frost against the tips of the grass. My boots sank slightly with each step, crunching over ice-crusted blades. The cold bit at my cheeks, sharp and steady, but I barely noticed. The mist clung low to the ground, curling around my ankles and reaching up to hide the horizon. I felt like I was stepping into a dream, or a memory I hadn't realized I still carried. The air smelled of frozen earth and distant wood smoke. It was empty, except for the occasional whisper of wind across the open field. Each breath came out in clouds, fragile and fleeting, dissipating before it could settle. I hugged my coat tighter, the letter pressing against my chest through the folds of my jacket. It was warm there, a tiny anchor against the chill. I remembered my grandfather's stories, told in his slow, deliberate way, as if each word was a seed meant to grow over time. He spoke of hidden stashes, left behind in winters when the snow covered everything, and the earth seemed like a silent guardian. Sometimes it was coins, sometimes tools, sometimes small notes, things meant to be found only by someone who was patient, someone who could see beyond the obvious. At the time, I had laughed, thinking them fanciful tales for a child. Now, standing here, every word of his voice felt alive. I walked slowly, letting my eyes sweep across the field. It looked ordinary, but nothing was ever ordinary in his stories. Each mound of snow, each bend in the frozen soil, seemed like it could be hiding something. The wind whispered faintly, brushing against my ears like a warning. I stopped, listening. There was nothing. And yet, it felt as though the field itself was breathing, holding a secret just for me. My boots left prints in the snow, lines that stretched behind me like a map. I paused at a small rise in the earth, looking down at a hollow I had played near as a child. Memories surfaced, afternoons spent running through the grass, the sun on my face, my grandfather's voice calling softly from the porch. Those days were warm, full of life, and utterly distant now. The hollow was empty, silent, but the weight of expectation pressed down. What had he left here? Something tangible? Or only the memory of him, waiting for me to see? I crouched and brushed away a thin layer of frost with my gloved hand. The earth beneath was cold and hard, stubborn against my fingers. Small pebbles cracked and shifted, tiny sounds that echoed like whispers. I could almost hear him in the wind, not a voice, not words, but the quiet, steady rhythm of someone who had planned this, who had waited for this exact moment. I felt both trespasser and guest at once, stepping into a space that was mine and not mine at the same time. While I moved slowly forward, boots sinking into patches of soft snow. The mist shifted, thickening, curling around the edges of the field. I squinted through it, trying to see landmarks I had once known, but everything was altered by frost. The tree line looked different, the old creek barely visible beneath its icy cover. I imagined him here, decades ago, moving silently, leaving traces no one else would notice. Each step I took felt like following a path he had worn just for me, invisible to anyone else. A sudden gust of wind rattled my coat and drew my attention to a small mound in the distance. It was nothing remarkable, just a rise in the field, but my chest tightened. My hands trembled slightly as I reached into my pocket, gripping the letter. Its edges had softened from the warmth of my hand. I pressed it to my lips for a moment, as if drawing courage from something I couldn't see. I crouched again, kneeling in the snow, feeling the frost seep through my gloves. The ground was uneven beneath my fingers, solid in some spots, soft in others. I traced the shapes with care, letting my mind wander through the stories he had told me, riddles hidden in snow and soil, challenges left as puzzles for someone patient enough to solve them. Every layer I moved through felt like peeling back a memory, each fold of earth a reminder of winters long past. Ka! The wind stirred again, sharper this time, carrying with it the faint smell of damp soil and frost. I paused, closed my eyes, and let the quiet settle around me. It was empty, yes, but not silent. It hummed with something I couldn't name, anticipation, warning, or maybe the lingering presence of him watching, waiting. My pulse quickened, not in fear, but in recognition. I had come here for a reason, and this field, with all its frost and memory, was ready to answer. I took a slow, deliberate step toward the center of the field. My boots sank deeper into a patch of snow, and I could hear the faint crunch of hidden twigs beneath. The air felt heavier here, almost electric, as though the ground itself remembered what lay beneath. I remembered the stories he had told, the hidden coins, the small stashes, the notes left for the patient. I felt a strange reverence kneeling in the snow, letting my hands hover above the earth. What exactly had he hidden? Gold? A letter? Or something else entirely, meant to teach me something I wasn't ready to understand yet? I traced the frost with my gloved fingers, small movements, patient, careful. Each scrape of earth beneath my touch was like a whisper, a faint promise of discovery. The field seemed ordinary, but I knew better. Nothing ordinary had ever come from him. The ordinary had a way of holding extraordinary things, waiting for the right eyes to see. I stood finally, brushing snow from my coat, surveying the field. Mist clung to the corners of the rising sun, pale light catching on frost and ice, turning the world silver. My breath was slow, deliberate, forming clouds that drifted away almost immediately. I felt the weight of the letter against my chest and understood, fully, that this was more than a search for something hidden. This was a return, to him, to memory, to the quiet pulse of the life he had lived here before me. The field stretched on, patient, waiting. I could almost hear the gentle rhythm of footsteps I would take tomorrow, or the next day. The earth was still cold beneath the frost, still holding its secrets. And I knew, in a way I couldn't yet name, that the first steps I had taken today were only the beginning. The snow stretched before me like a pale, frozen ocean. Faint indentations caught my eye, little mounds that didn't belong, disrupting the smooth blanket of white. I crouched, brushing my gloved hand over the surface. The frost cracked softly beneath my touch, whispering back to me. The field was silent, but the silence carried weight, as if it had been waiting for someone or something to disturb it. The light of early morning stretched shadows long across the frozen land. Each tree and rise in the ground cast slivers of gray and black that twisted across the white, making familiar shapes feel strange, uncanny. I paused, squinting through the mist. The field was the same I had known as a child, yet the frost and the shadow made it alien. Every line of snow seemed deliberate, every curve a secret hiding place. I stepped slowly, boots sinking lightly, and the soft crunch of ice underfoot sounded louder than it should. Each breath fogged in the cold air. I scanned the indentations again, wondering if they were my own from a step before or someone else's. My chest tightened. Could someone have beaten me here? Had I arrived too late, or was it only the wind and the snow playing tricks? At the Sishav bride. I remembered the stories my grandfather told me about hidden stashes left in winters so harsh that even he spoke of them in whispers. He never revealed where they were, only left hints in his riddles, and the careful way he watched me learn patience. The thought that someone else might have found this first twisted a knot in my chest. I had come here seeking connection, to him, to memory, to something buried. The idea of another person finding it before me felt like a betrayal I hadn't even suffered yet. The shadows shifted as the sun climbed slowly, pale light breaking through the mist. They stretched across the field, elongating every mound, every crack, making the snow look uneven and alive. I stepped closer to one of the larger mounds, boots crunching softly, and brushed away frost. Nothing moved. Nothing gave up its secret. But the earth beneath my gloves felt different, denser somehow, as if it remembered being touched. I paused and breathed in, the cold air filling my lungs, sharp and real. The letter in my pocket burned gently against my ribs. I imagined my grandfather here, decades ago, treading the same path, inspecting the ground with quiet hands, leaving small traces for someone patient enough to see. My fingers itched to dig, but I hesitated. There was a respect to this place, a sacred patience. If I rushed, I might lose more than the gold. I might lose the chance to understand why he had left it, why he had trusted me to find it. A crow flew low across the field, wings brushing the frost, its shadow slicing across the snow. I watched it land on a bare branch at the edge of the tree line. The field felt less empty suddenly, more alive. My heartbeat sped, though my body stayed still. I imagined footsteps other than mine, distant, blurred but real. The thought pressed against my chest like the weight of ice. Could someone else have come here in the night? Could my grandfather's secret already belong to another? I knelt slowly beside one of the smaller mounds, brushing away more frost. The earth beneath was hard, stubborn, unyielding. I dug my fingers into the frozen soil, feeling the cold bite through my gloves. Tiny pebbles shifted, making soft clinking sounds. My breath caught. Each noise felt like it carried a warning. The field was quiet, but the quiet had layers, the noise of snow, wind, distant trees, and something else. Something I couldn't name, something alive in anticipation. I straightened, wiping snow from my gloves, eyes scanning the horizon. The morning light was weak, a pale silver that didn't touch everything evenly. Shadows clung to the hollows, the rises, the tips of grass, making ordinary shapes look like signs. I remembered my grandfather telling me about patience, about watching the land, about listening to what it wanted to say. I realized now that he hadn't just been speaking about the treasure. He had been speaking about the waiting, about the noticing, about learning to see beneath the obvious. I stepped cautiously toward another indentation. The snow had softened slightly with the faint warmth of dawn. I pressed my palm against the frost, and it cracked under pressure, tiny fragments scattering like forgotten pieces of memory. I felt a strange connection to the place, as if the earth had remembered me, even before I arrived. The field was familiar and strange all at once, a puzzle meant to test not strength, patience, and quiet observation. The wind picked up, brushing past my ears and tugging at my coat. It whispered faintly, carrying the scent of damp earth and ice. I closed my eyes and listened, letting the field speak in the only way it could. I imagined my grandfather here, hands buried in frost, leaving subtle marks, watching me decades later, waiting for me to notice. My pulse slowed. The fear of someone else arriving first faded, replaced by the slow, careful thrill of discovery. I knelt again at a mound slightly larger than the others. Fingers trembling slightly, I brushed snow and ice aside. The earth beneath was uneven, like it had been worked, shifted deliberately. My heart caught. I had found a trace, a subtle hint of what was buried beneath. It wasn't much, just a small rise, a change in texture, but it felt like a doorway opening. The field, so quiet, seemed to hold its breath. I stood finally, scanning the shadows stretching across the snow. Everything looked different now, smaller yet deeper, familiar yet foreign. The indentations hinted at secrets, whispers of what might be, reminders that the earth had stories older than I could imagine. I pressed the letter to my chest again, feeling the tremble of its paper against my heart. This was more than a search for something hidden. It was a journey into memory, into connection, into the unspoken bond I had with him. I took a slow step back, letting the shadows fall across my boots. The field waited, patient, silent, alive. I could almost hear him there, not speaking, just watching, letting me find my way. And I knew, without needing proof, that the first traces I had discovered were only the beginning. The snow crunched underfoot as I walked slowly toward the tree line, anticipation wrapped around my chest like ice. The field held its secrets, waiting for me to reach them, and I would. The shovel felt heavier than I expected, its wooden handle cold and rough against my palms. I knelt at the edge of the mound, snow brushing the hem of my coat, and pressed the metal edge into the frozen earth. Each scoop revealed frost-crusted soil, stubborn and unyielding. Tiny fragments of glass glinted faintly, coins buried half a century ago clinking softly beneath my hands. The field was silent, but the silence pressed around me, patient and watchful. The sky was pale, a muted wash of dawn, light spilling across the snow in silver threads. My breath puffed in clouds that vanished as quickly as they appeared. The cold gnawed at my cheeks and fingers, but I barely noticed, absorbed in the rhythm of digging. Scoop, lift, drop. The sound of earth moving, soft and deliberate, was louder here than it should have been. Each motion felt sacred, like stepping into a ritual I had forgotten the rules of, but instinctively understood. I paused to rest, leaning the shovel against my shoulder, eyes scanning the ground I had turned over. Small mounds of debris, sticks, bits of metal, remnants of old winters, lay scattered around me. I brushed snow from a coin, its surface dull but recognizable. I thought of my grandfather's eyes, quiet, deliberate, always watching, always waiting. There was a patience in him that had seemed ordinary at the time, now luminous with meaning. Had he imagined me here, kneeling in the snow, tracing the paths he had hinted at in stories? The field seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind had softened, curling around me without stirring, as though it were observing. I wondered if he had chosen this spot not for the treasure itself, but for the way it would feel to find it. And now, if digging was less about gold and more about walking slowly through memory, connecting past to present through effort and care. Each scoop brought something unexpected, shards of colored glass, a rusty button, a coin stamped decades ago. I placed them carefully beside me, small monuments to winters past. My hands ached, numb with cold and labor, but I couldn't stop. Every movement felt like a conversation with him, silent but meaningful. I imagined his voice in the rustle of trees, in the faint creak of the shovel against frozen soil, patient, careful, observe. I thought of the stories he had told, simple riddles with buried truths, and the way he had smiled without using his eyes. The stories had always felt whimsical, almost trivial, until now. Now they were instructions, gentle guidance left in plain sight. I realized that this digging, slow, deliberate, intimate, was as much about understanding him as it was about uncovering the Earth's secret. The mound I had chosen seemed ordinary at first, but each layer peeled back revealed history. Traces of wind-twisted snow, frozen mud, scattered remnants of old seasons. I pressed the shovel deeper, feeling the resistance of soil that had settled into decades of cold. My palms ached, gloves soaked through, but I persisted. There was a rhythm here, a cadence to uncovering the past that I could feel in my bones. Scoop, lift, drop, pause, reflect, repeat. A bird stirred in the distance, wings brushing snow-covered branches. I paused, listening. The field remained still, holding a quiet that was almost tangible. I imagined my grandfather here in winters past, stooping over the same soil, leaving small pieces of himself behind. Was this how he had taught me patience? How he had shown me the weight of careful observation? The treasure wasn't just gold. It was a way of seeing, of feeling, of remembering. I wiped frost from the edge of the shovel and pressed it again into the mound. The soil shifted beneath my hands, revealing a small glimmer of something metallic. My heart quickened. I brushed away the surrounding frost, careful, deliberate. Coins, glass, small remnants of life, buried long ago, stared up at me. The discovery wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a chest spilling over with riches, but it felt sacred, intimate. Each piece was a fragment of the winters my grandfather had lived, a conversation across time. I dug deeper, guided by intuition more than memory, letting my hands and eyes search for signs. Every small clink of metal against metal felt like a message, a reminder that he had thought of me, had imagined this moment, had trusted me to be here. The weight in my chest grew heavier, not from labor, but from connection. I felt him with me in a way I hadn't in years, through story and soil and patient silence. The shovel dug through frost and soil until my arms ached, muscles trembling from effort. I set it aside for a moment, brushing snow from my gloves and letting the cold sting my fingertips. I knelt, pressing hands into the earth, feeling its texture, its resistance, its quiet persistence. It wasn't about the gold anymore. It was about the act, the digging, the uncovering, the slow communion with a man I had loved but scarcely understood. Each fragment I unearthed, a coin, a shard of glass, a rusty button, became part of a map I was drawing in my mind. Not a map to treasure, but a map to memory, to understanding, to him. I realized that the ritual itself, the labor and patience, was what he had intended. The gold was incidental, connection was essential. I rose slowly, brushing snow from my knees and coat, the mound now disturbed, revealing its secrets in quiet fragments. The field seemed to exhale around me, soft mist curling over the frost, catching the morning light. I held a small handful of coins and glass in my palms, examining them carefully. They felt like messages, tangible reminders of winters past and of a grandfather who had known how to leave traces that demanded patience, reverence, and care. I pressed the letter from my pocket against my chest. Its edges were soft from warmth, from repeated handling. I could feel the weight of it, and the weight of the field, and the weight of him. I realized that this digging, this careful, deliberate uncovering of soil and memory, had already given me more than gold. It had given me him again, quiet and patient, observing from somewhere beyond my sight. The sun had climbed slightly higher now, brushing pale gold over the frost and mounds of earth. The field looked ordinary again, but I knew better. Beneath each layer of soil, beneath the snow and frost, there were stories, fragments, pieces of life deliberately left behind. I gathered a few of the coins and glass into my palm, brushed the frost from them, and let the field breathe around me. I lifted the shovel, resting it against my shoulder once more, and looked out across the expanse of snow. The labor had revealed more than I expected. Some more active for. It had revealed patience, presence, connection, and the subtle, unspoken ways we leave pieces of ourselves for those who care enough to notice. And I knew, even as I wiped my gloves and rose to my feet, that this was only the beginning. The field held more secrets, more fragments of memory waiting for discovery, and I would return. The frost was thick, stubborn, hiding the earth beneath in a quiet, white insistence. My shovel hit it again, deeper this time, and a sharp metallic clink rang out, cutting through the stillness of the field. I froze, boots pressed into the snow, breath catching in the cold. The sound echoed off the distant trees, bouncing back like a signal I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. My hands trembled, half from the chill, half from the sudden jolt of expectation. The sun had climbed slightly higher, pale light spilling across the mound of disturbed snow. Frost clung to the edges of the shovel, glittering faintly as I pressed again. I moved slowly, deliberately, letting each scoop of frozen earth fall away with care. My chest tightened with anticipation, a mix of dread and hope curling together like smoke in the cold morning air. I knelt in the snow, brushing frost from a patch of earth that had been stubbornly unyielding. And then, metal. My heart thumped harder than I had imagined possible. I brushed snow aside with my gloved hands, careful not to scratch or damage it. Beneath the frost was a rusted tin box, small but solid. Its surface was mottled with age, the corners bent from years of hiding beneath ice and soil. I ran my fingers along it, feeling the ridges of time, the weight of history pressing into my palms. For a moment I couldn't move. The field was still. The wind had softened, the snow seemed to hold its breath, and all I could hear was my own pulse in my ears. I remembered my grandfather's quiet eyes, the way he watched without speaking, the slow pause before he shared anything of consequence. Had he left this for me alone, or had others known, long ago, and kept silent? The thought made a chill run deeper than the morning frost. I found something to pry the lid open with, the edge of my shovel worn smooth from labor. It scraped against the tin with a soft, reluctant sound. The lid gave way, revealing a faded cloth folded neatly inside. I lifted it gently, feeling the texture through numb fingers. Beneath the cloth lay stacks of coins, their gold warm in color, vivid against the muted whites and grays of snow and frost. My breath caught. Gold. Real gold. Not just coins, but a treasure from winters long ago, preserved against time itself. I touched the edges of the coins lightly, tracing the intricate patterns worn by age. They felt heavier than I expected, solid and tangible, a bridge from past to present. Shock and relief mingled, twisting together in my chest. I hadn't come expecting wealth. I hadn't even expected closure. Salve to Bulbul. Yet here it was, in my hands, warm in color and weight, proof of a life carefully lived, of secrets kept and entrusted. I leaned back against my heels, letting the tin rest on my lap. The field around me seemed larger now, stretched by the significance of discovery. I thought of him, my grandfather, quiet, patient, deliberate. His stories had always hinted at secrets, but I hadn't realized they were instructions in disguise. The field, the frost, the waiting, all of it had been preparation. This discovery was as much about understanding him as it was about uncovering gold. A crow cawed from the distant tree line, wings flapping against the pale morning light. I shivered, not from cold, but from the strange, bittersweet realization of the moment. The coins weren't just money. They were a testament to his careful thinking, his foresight, and his trust in me to see through the ritual of discovery. I felt closer to him than I had in years, connected by patience, labor, and quiet observation. Yoke. I traced the surface of one coin with a fingertip, imagining the hands that had pressed it decades ago. Tiny scratches and nicks told stories I couldn't yet understand. I thought of winters past, of snow heavy on roofs and fences, of nights he spent alone, hiding these treasures carefully beneath frozen fields. How many people had walked this land unaware? How many winters had passed without anyone noticing? And yet here I was, following the thread he had left, unfolding it step by step. I realized that the act of digging had prepared me for this moment, not just physically, but emotionally. Each scoop, each fragment of soil and glass and metal had taught patience and reverence. I felt the weight of him in every movement, the echo of lessons he had left behind without ever speaking them aloud. The gold, I understood now, was only part of the gift. The true treasure was the bridge to memory, to connection, to understanding. I wrapped my gloved hands around the tin, holding it close to my chest. The cold metal warmed faintly against my body, carrying a story across decades. I imagined my grandfather standing somewhere beyond sight, silent but attentive, watching as I uncovered what he had left for me. Relief mingled with disbelief, with the weight of wonder that comes when something long hidden finally reveals itself. I hadn't expected this, but I understood it. I had been ready, in ways I hadn't realized, to meet him here in the snow. The wind rustled through distant trees, brushing against my coat and the mound of earth I had disturbed. I looked across the field, shadows still long in the morning light. The snow glittered faintly, but I hardly noticed. I was focused entirely on the tin, on the gold, on the quiet conversation I felt across time. Each coin seemed to pulse with the memory of winters past, of lessons taught without words, of care and patience woven into the very soil. I brushed snow from the cloth and lifted a coin to catch the light. It gleamed against the muted gray and white, defying the cold around me. I felt the weight of expectation, the weight of discovery, pressing into my chest. I wondered again who else could have known about this place, if anyone had come here and left unnoticed. And yet the moment felt mine alone, private, sacred. I realized that the field, the frost, the labor of digging, all of it had prepared me not just to find gold, but to understand the life and mind of someone I had loved and barely known. I let the tin rest beside me, breathing slowly, letting the moment settle. The coins, the frost, the mound of earth, all of it was a story, told without words, waiting for the patient observer to see. I knew this was more than a discovery. Well, how? It was a conversation with him, across years and winters, across frost and silence. I stood finally, brushing snow from my knees and coat, glancing back at the tin. The field was quiet, patient, and alive with memory. My breath fogged the cold air, clouds drifting like whispers across the frozen ground. I pressed the letter from my pocket to my chest and felt the subtle warmth, Wafimering, nigh, the echo of guidance, the silent approval of a presence long gone but keenly felt. The field stretched beyond me, waiting still, holding more secrets, more fragments of memory. I knew I had found the first part, but there would be more, and I would return. The treasure was not only gold, it was the bridge, the connection, the quiet understanding that comes when someone trusts you to see what they intended. And I would honor that trust, step by step, in silence, in frost, in memory. The snow pressed cold and unyielding beneath me, but I hardly noticed. The tin box rested beside my knees, the coins stacked inside catching faint morning light. I pulled the letter from my coat pocket, fingers stiff and numb, and unfolded it slowly. The paper crinkled softly, brittle with age, as if it had waited decades just for this moment. I leaned forward, letting the wind brush my face, and began to read again. The words were the same I had skimmed earlier, but now they seemed alive, carrying weight I hadn't felt before. Every line trembled with his handwriting, careful and deliberate, shaking with time and intention. Patience, trust, courage. I whispered the phrases under my breath, letting them roll across the cold air. Each syllable pressed into my chest, resonating in ways I hadn't noticed before. The note wasn't a map, and it wasn't a warning exactly. It was a conversation, hidden in plain sight, waiting for me to understand. The field around me held its breath. Shadows stretched long, silver and gray, curling across the frozen expanse. I pressed the letter closer to my chest, eyes scanning every stroke, every tiny curl of ink. He hadn't simply left gold beneath the frost. He had left a test, a ritual, a chance to uncover something more than material. I felt his presence in every careful pause of the writing, in every margin and indentation. He had known I would come, and he had trusted me to see not just the treasure, but the meaning behind it. My hands ached from cold, but I couldn't put the letter down. The words now seemed layered, each one a thread connecting me to the winters he had lived and the patience he had cultivated. I imagined him sitting alone at his desk, pen in hand, thinking carefully about what to leave behind. He had hidden not just coins, but lessons about persistence, about observation, about understanding beyond the obvious. I leaned back, letting the snow cushion my spine, the tin box heavy beside me. The coins glimmered faintly, but my eyes stayed on the letter: patience, trust, courage. I repeated again, tasting the words as though they were something tangible. It occurred to me then that the digging, the frost, the quiet of the field, all of it had been preparation. He had designed a journey, a test, and a conversation all at once. The gold was incidental. The treasure was him and his intention, and the understanding he had left for me to find. I traced a crease in the paper, imagining his fingers pressing it the same way mine did now. My chest tightened, a subtle ache that was neither grief nor joy, but something in between. I felt closer to him than I had in years, and yet the distance between us, the years, the silences, the things never spoken, weighed heavily. The treasure wasn't only what I could hold, the treasure when what Bisman Sowles. It was the bridge he had left, stretching across decades, inviting me to meet him halfway. The wind picked up slightly, brushing frost against my face and letting tiny crystals fall from the bare branches nearby. I closed my eyes, feeling it on my cheeks, and imagined him there, quiet, patient, observant. The letter whispered between my fingers like his voice, soft and deliberate. I hadn't realized until this moment that the treasure was a reflection, a mirror of patience and courage, of seeing and trusting. The frost, the coins, the tin, the frost, even the weight of the snow on the field, all of it was part of the lesson. I opened my eyes and looked again at the note. A line I had skimmed before now struck me with clarity. The value is not in the finding, but in how you search. My breath caught. The ache in my chest grew, not from longing for wealth, but from longing for understanding. I realized that this moment, sitting in snow and frost, reading his careful words, was more precious than the coins beside me. This was connection, distilled and hidden, waiting for patience and courage to uncover it. I leaned closer to the box, fingers brushing the metal, feeling the cold bite through my gloves. I imagined him standing over the field decades ago, mapping this spot in his mind, letting the snow and frost and silence prepare whoever came to find it. Perhaps he had doubted anyone could follow the path he had laid, yet here I was, kneeling where he had intended, tracing his steps in spirit. The coins reflected the pale light of morning, warm in color against the cold, but their warmth paled beside the weight of intention, the thoughtfulness behind every action he had taken. I traced the edges of the tin gently, feeling the bumps of rust, the ridges of age. Each imperfection spoke of time passing, of winters endured, of quiet patience. The note had revealed itself now as more than instructions. It was a companion in my hands, a voice across the years, reminding me that what mattered wasn't simply discovery, but presence. The field, the frost, the wind, all of it mattered. It had mattered to him, and now it mattered to me. I rested my forehead against my knees, letting the letter fall lightly across my lap. Snow clung to my coat, melting faintly with the warmth of my body. I could feel the field around me, the subtle dips, the shadows stretching across frozen ground, the quiet that seemed to hold memory in every flake. My grandfather's hand, his patience, his careful planning were here with me in every detail, and I realized with an ache that was sweet and sharp that the gold itself was not the prize. It had been the doorway. The true reward was understanding, trust, and the chance to feel his presence across decades. I closed the letter gently, folding it back into its worn envelope. I pressed it once more to my chest, letting the weight settle there. The coins glimmered faintly beside me, warm in tone, but I barely noticed. My heart and mind were full of him, his patience, his quiet, his trust. The snow whispered softly around me, carrying the faint scent of earth and frost, a reminder that the field itself had been part of the message all along. I rose slowly, brushing snow from my coat and gloves. The field stretched before me, empty yet alive with memory. The tin box sat patiently beside me, silent, as though it understood the shift in my awareness. I tucked the letter safely into my pocket, the paper warm against my chest. I looked once more at the horizon, where shadows stretched long and pale light caught the frost in silver threads. The treasure was here, but I understood now it was never only the gold. It was the patience, the courage, the trust. It was the patience, the courage, the trust. The bridge across time that my grandfather had left for me to find. And I knew I would return to the field, to the digging, to the quiet presence of his design. The letter, the coins, the frost, all of it was a reminder that understanding comes slowly, deliberately, and with reverence. And I would honor it, step by step, winter by winter, letter in hand, heart open, following the path he had set before me. The snow crunched softly beneath my boots, each step echoing in the empty expanse of the field. The tin box remained half buried behind me, its weight both literal and invisible, a tether to the past I had uncovered. Pale sunlight spilled across the frost, stretching long shadows that seemed to bend toward me. I paused, letting the cold bite at my cheeks, and listened. The wind moved through the barren trees, a low whisper that carried memories I thought I had left behind. I turned, taking in the field one last time. Frost clung to broken branches and tufts of grass, glinting like tiny fragments of glass. Each mound of earth I had disturbed felt heavier now, charged with echoes of laughter, of stories, of quiet secrets. I ran a gloved hand over the snow, leaving a trace of my presence, and felt a tug at my chest, a sense of leaving part of myself behind, even as I walked forward. Childhood came rushing back in fragments. I could hear it in the silence around me. It's around me, the laughter of my younger self chasing a stray dog across this very field, the sharp edge of my mother's voice calling us in for supper, the smell of wood smoke drifting from the farmhouse chimney in the evenings, each memory pressed against the present, fragile and vivid, mingling with the rhythm of my footsteps. The wind seemed to carry them, faint but insistent, brushing my ears with whispers of long-forgotten voices. I thought of family arguments that had ended in silence, of my grandfather sitting in the corner of the farmhouse, quiet, observing. The field had held all of it, joy, tension, the weight of things unsaid. And now, the gold, the note, the labor of digging had folded into that same space, a layer on top of memory, a bridge between past and present. I wondered if I would ever be able to disentangle them, or if the field was meant to keep them bound together, for anyone patient enough to notice. The tin box, half hidden in snow, called to me one last time. I turned my gaze toward it, feeling the pull of both discovery and responsibility. Each coin, each fragment of history had reminded me of my grandfather, his patience, his quiet guidance. And yet, as I stepped forward leaving it behind, I realized that the treasure was already fulfilling its purpose. The field, the frost, the act of uncovering, all of it had transformed me, left a mark I couldn't erase. I paused mid-step, letting the wind tug at my coat. A memory of him teaching me how to tie a knot, hands steady, voice patient, returned. I smiled faintly, a small ache warming my chest. This field had always been more than land. It had been a classroom, a confessional, a place where patience, courage, and understanding could be tested. I had passed the test in my own quiet way, a fibble de course, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that more waited, that the field held secrets yet undiscovered. A faint clatter of ice breaking somewhere to the edge of the field drew my attention. I stopped, listening. The wind shifted, carrying a sound I thought I would never hear again. My own laughter, faint and childlike, bouncing across the frost. It mingled with the memory of voices long silenced, family dinners, quiet evenings in the farmhouse, the creak of floorboards, and the hum of winter cold. My chest tightened. Each step away from the tin felt like leaving a part of myself behind, tethered to memories that were alive in the snow and wind. I traced the edge of the field with my eyes, letting the pale sunlight catch on frost-covered weeds. Shadows stretched long, curving over the mounds I had disturbed. The box, coins, and letter had been mine for only a short while, but the act of uncovering had opened something older, deeper, a conversation with the past that I had only just begun to understand. I wondered if the field had been waiting all along for the right heart, for someone patient enough to listen. I remembered how my grandfather had spoken of hidden stashes during hard winters, stories I had once dismissed as riddles or games. Now I understood. Each hiding place, each secret buried beneath frost and soil, was a lesson in patience, in observation, in understanding what is valuable and what is necessary. The field had taught me more than I expected. It had taught me about him, about myself, and about the quiet weight of secrets kept and trusted. The wind shifted again, brushing cold against my ears, whispering faintly through the branches. I thought of other possible treasures, other fragments of memory, or gold hidden by his careful hands. What else had he left behind, for me, for someone else willing to look? The thought sent a shiver down my spine, not from fear, but from anticipation. The field was patient. It had all the time in the world. I brushed snow from my coat and gloves, eyes lingering on the tin one last time. Its warmth, both literal and metaphorical, seemed to pulse faintly, a reminder of the bridge I had crossed, of the act of discovery that had revealed patience, trust, and courage. I stepped forward, each footfall deliberate, feeling the crunch of frost and soil beneath me. My grandfather's presence lingered in the air, in the silence, in the rhythm of the field. Even as I walked away, I could hear the echoes, faint, fragile, insistent. Laughter, arguments, quiet moments of connection, lessons learned and left behind. I realized that the field wasn't just a place to find gold. It was a place to remember, to understand, to connect. And perhaps it was waiting still for someone else, some heart patient enough to uncover the next secret. The farmhouse came into view, distant but familiar, roof white with snow, windows dark. I tightened my coat around me, glancing back once at the field. Shadows stretched long, silver and gray, covering the earth I had disturbed. I could feel the stories lingering there, layered like frost, waiting for the right heart to uncover them. My steps slowed, each one a quiet farewell to the field, to the tin, to the moment of revelation that had changed me. And yet, even as I moved toward the warmth of the house, I knew the field was not empty. Oh, it was alive with memory, with whispers, with waiting. What else had he hidden? What other fragments of life and wisdom remained beneath the snow? The question settled in my chest, quiet but insistent, and I knew I would return not just for gold, but for connection, for understanding, for the chance to listen to the echoes of the past. The snow crunched softly one last time beneath my boots. The field stretched behind me, silent but patient. Shadows shifted, wind whispered, and I felt the weight of discovery settle deep into my chest. The tin box remained, its secrets partially revealed, its lessons unfolding. I glanced down at the path I had carved, footprints leading back to the mound, back to memory, back to him. And I carried the letter close, pressed to my chest, and let the field exhale in silence. Whatever else it held, I would return. The past had more to teach, and I would listen. The door creaked under my hand as I stepped inside the farmhouse, boots leaving thin trails of snow across the worn floorboards. The tin box was heavy in my arms, weighted with history as much as gold. Sunlight slanted through frost-fingered windows, catching dust motes in its quiet beams. I set the box carefully on the kitchen table, listening to the small echo it made, a sound that seemed to announce more than its presence. The house smelled of old wood and lingering winter cold, familiar yet distant, like a memory I had not fully held. I paused and breathed slowly. Silence had always been my grandfather's language, and now, it seemed, it had become mine as well. Each creak of the floor, each whisper of wind through the shutters, carried expectation. I could almost feel eyes on me, though no one had arrived yet. The gold felt different indoors, the weight of it magnified by the intimacy of the space, and the shadow of the past pressing against every wall. When the first relative arrived, I felt it immediately, a faint shift in the air, a tightening at the corners of my chest. They looked at the box with a mixture of curiosity and something darker, something old, like grudges pressed under long years of polite smiles. Their voice was even, casual, but I caught the edge beneath the words. So, you really found it? They paused, eyes flicking toward me, as if measuring my worth, my claim, my right. I nodded slowly. Yes, I said softly. My hand still rested on the box, almost protective. It had been my grandfather's secret, my journey, my understanding. And suddenly, it belonged to a family I barely recognized, or maybe one I had chosen not to understand until now. Conversation twisted and turned around polite curiosities, probing questions, silent accusations hidden behind casual tones. I realized then that the gold was more than material. It was a mirror reflecting long-buried resentments, unspoken expectations, and the fractures we had never mended. As they spoke, I thought of my grandfather. He had trusted me with patience, with courage, with a quiet understanding of who I was. Could these distant voices, sharpened by envy and misunderstanding, diminish what I had uncovered? I pressed my palms lightly to the table, feeling the cold metal of the tin beneath my fingers. The warmth of the gold within could not extend to the walls of this room, nor could it thaw the frost that had grown over family ties long neglected. I listened more than I spoke, letting their words echo while I traced memories instead of arguments. I remembered evenings by the hearth with him, quiet laughter, the gentle weight of his hand on mine. This treasure had been a bridge, a conversation, across time. And now here it seemed to test my own resolve, to test my own resolve and a resolve. To understand, to navigate what was mine and what belonged to others. The conversation shifted, inevitably, to suspicion. "Are you sure it's all there?" one cousin asked, voice carefully neutral. Their gaze lingered on the tin, on my hands, on the way I held it close, and I felt a subtle ache in my chest. Years of silence, misunderstandings, and unspoken resentments seemed to rise at once. I realized the gold had become more than coins. It had become a symbol, a catalyst, a lens through which old wounds were magnified. I swallowed, keeping my voice calm. "It's all there," I said, but my tone carried more than fact. He carried memory labor connection. The digging, the frost, the quiet moments in the field, no one else had witnessed them. No one else had traced my grandfather's intention with the same care. I thought about patience, trust, courage, words from the letter, and tried to channel them into my presence. As the questions continued, I noticed the subtle shifts, the glimpses of envy, the quiet comparisons to years I had not shared with anyone else. They spoke of inheritance, of fairness, of what they imagined they were owed. Each word, each hesitation pressed against me, but I held firm. I felt my grandfather's voice in my mind, gentle and precise. The value is not in the finding, in first, but in how you search. The gold, I realized, was never meant to resolve these old tensions. It was meant to illuminate them, and illuminate they did. I saw the fractures clearly now, the distant cousins who never understood our bond, the jealous glances, the unspoken questions about worth and privilege. I felt a quiet grief for what could not be mended in a single afternoon, and a subtle pride for what I had earned, not through blood or entitlement, but through presence and patience. I placed my hand on the box, feeling the cold metal through the thin gloves. "I didn't dig this for anyone else," I said softly, letting the words float in the room like fragile glass. I dug it because he trusted me. There was no anger, no challenge, only the quiet authority of truth. The room shifted slightly at that, a pause in conversation, a recognition that the past was not something to be claimed, but something to be understood. The tension did not vanish, but it softened. I saw glimpses of understanding in their eyes, hesitant, like frost melting under the first sun. And I realized that this confrontation was never about the gold. It was about honesty, about who had walked the field, who had listened to the letter, and who had followed the patient, quiet path my grandfather had laid. Later, the house settled into quiet again. Voices faded, footsteps retreated, and I was left with the tin, the gold, and the echo of conversation. I traced the ridges of rust on the box, remembering the frost and snow of the field, the hush of morning, the anticipation that had weighed on my shoulders. The gold was warm to the touch, but the warmth in my chest came from something older: patience, trust, courage, and a quiet knowledge that no one could take from me. The wind brushed the shutters, carrying faint echoes of voices long silenced. I realized that the confrontation had mirrored the past as much as it had reflected the present. The treasure, for all its weight and shine, was only part of the story. The rest was patience, courage, and the willingness to stand firm in understanding. I set the tin carefully on the kitchen table, letting it rest. I pressed the letter to my chest and looked out the frost-lined window. Shadows stretched across the yard, and the field beyond waited, patient as ever, for whoever might come next. The house was quiet now, but I could feel the weight of history pressing softly, insistently. I had faced others' jealousy, their doubts, and I had survived, carrying not just gold, but memory, trust, and the quiet reflection of family ties, fractured and imperfect, yet illuminated. And I knew, as I stepped away from the table and toward the hearth, that this was only the beginning. The gold was discovered, but the lessons remained. The mirror it held reflected more than wealth. It reflected choices, courage, and the hidden truths that waited patiently in silence. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, throwing pale, flickering light across the walls. Shadows stretched and leaned, moving like silent ghosts with every shift of the flames. Outside, the wind scraped against the windows, a low, persistent moan that filled the spaces between thoughts. I sat in the old armchair, hands folded over my knees, boots still dusted with snow, and felt the quiet press against me. The house was empty, the world outside hushed, and for the first time all day, I could hear myself breathe. I reached over and let my fingers brush the tin box on the floor beside me. Its cold metal contrasted with the warmth of the fire, and I felt the weight of it settle into my chest. Gold or not, it had always been more than coins. It had been patience, trust, memory, and a quiet conversation across time. And now, in the solitude of the night, it waited silently, a witness to the questions I couldn't yet answer. The candle beside me flickered, its flame trembling as if aware of the tension in the room. I thought of my grandfather, of his quiet hands and calm gaze, the way he had spoken slowly, as if measuring every word against the weight of the world. I wondered about the choices he had made, why he had hidden this treasure, why he had trusted me to find it. Had it been for me, or for the lesson, or perhaps for both? The questions pressed lightly against my mind, soft but unrelenting. I traced the edge of the tin with my fingertips, imagining him standing here in this very room decades ago. I could almost see him in the flicker of candlelight, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes reflecting quiet calculation, and a tenderness he rarely showed. I realized how little I had truly understood him, even in life. And now, with the gold and the letter, with the field and the frost, I had pieces of him scattered across time, fragments I could hold but never completely assemble. Outside, the wind shifted, rattling the shutters, and I flinched slightly at the sound. It reminded me of nights I had spent in the farmhouse as a child, when storms like this rattled the windows and the house seemed to breathe with us. I remembered the smell of wood smoke, the quiet hum of the stove, the soft weight of a blanket across my legs. Each memory folded over the present, a reminder that history was always alive, even when we weren't paying attention. I closed my eyes and let my mind wander through those memories, past the snow-crusted field, past the digging, past the confrontation with relatives. All of it led here, to this moment of quiet reflection. I thought of his life, the choices, the sacrifices, the small acts of patience and foresight. I wondered if he had hidden gold before, and if so, why. Was it only about survival? Or about teaching someone else to see, to feel, to understand what is truly valuable? The fire crackled, answering nothing, leaving space only for thought. I lifted the candle slightly, watching the light dance across the walls. Shadows lengthened, twisted, and leaned, almost reaching for me. In them, I could see reflections of the past, arguments softened into memory, laughter echoing faintly, silent evenings by the fire with him. I felt both closer and farther from him than ever before. The closeness came from understanding, from connecting the dots he had left behind. The distance came from knowing there were gaps I might never fill, secrets he had taken with him, reasons I would never fully know. My fingers brushed the worn edge of the armchair, tracing its familiar grooves. I thought about patience again, about courage, about trust, words he had left unspoken but demonstrated in every careful act. I realized that the gold had always been secondary. The true treasure was the lesson, the bridge across time, the invitation to understand and to feel the weight of choice. And yet, understanding brought new questions, quiet but insistent, pressing against the edges of my mind like the wind against the windows. I stood, pacing slowly, boots whispering against the wooden floor. Candlelight caught the snow-dusted mantle, glinting faintly, and I imagined his face in the flicker of flame. Could peace come from understanding him, from connecting the threads he left behind? Or was the lesson meant to be ongoing, a lifelong conversation without a clear conclusion? The tin box waited silently at my feet, its cold weight grounding me even as my thoughts drifted through decades of history and memory. I knelt beside it, tracing the rusted edges, thinking of frost fields and the quiet effort of digging. Each coin had been a symbol, each scoop of earth a lesson. I could almost hear him whispering across the years, patience, trust, courage. The words settled into me, soft and deliberate, and for the first time, I felt the faint pulse of understanding, fragile but real. The fire crackled again, sending small sparks into the air. I leaned back against the chair, letting the warmth spread slowly through me. I thought about the confrontations with relatives, the jealousy, the skepticism. None of it seemed important now, not compared to the quiet intimacy of reflection, the chance to sit here and piece together a man I had loved but never fully understood. The gold had revealed history, patience, and trust, but it had also shown me the weight of curiosity and the subtle demands of understanding. I poured a small cup of tea, steam curling like smoke ghosts, into the room. The aroma mingled with the scent of wood and candle wax, wrapping around me. I sipped slowly, letting the warmth fill the cold spaces in my chest. Reflection was quiet work, demanding patience, yet it offered something tangible, the slow threading together of past and present, memory and understanding. Outside, the wind had calmed slightly, brushing the snow across the roof in soft arcs. I watched the flames flicker, shadows playing across the walls, imagining him sitting here decades ago. I felt his presence, not physically, but in the patterns of thought he had left behind, in the subtle lessons, in the way silence had always carried meaning. Understanding him fully might never be possible, but in this moment, I felt close enough to try. I leaned back, eyes half closed, listening to the fire and the house and the faint whisper of wind. Questions lingered, delicate as frost on the windows. Could understanding bring peace, or only more questions? Perhaps both. Perhaps the point was not to resolve, but to reflect, to inhabit the space he had left behind and feel it fully. I pressed the tin box to my chest gently, letting its weight remind me of patience, courage, and trust, and let the candlelight flicker quietly in answer. The house settled into silence. Shadows stretched across the room, a soft dance between light and dark. I felt both grounded and adrift, connected and separate, close to him yet aware of the distance decades could create. The gold, the field, the letter, the confrontations, all had led here, to nightfall, reflection, and the gentle ache of understanding. And in that quiet, I realized the lesson was not complete, nor ever meant to be. Peace would come in moments like this, in reflection, in patience, in accepting that some questions may always remain. I pressed the candle closer to my face, letting the warmth seep into my hands, and listened to the wind scrape the windows, carrying faint whispers of the past. I closed my eyes, letting the shadows and firelight fold around me, and felt him there, not fully revealed, but always present, waiting for the next heart willing to understand. The horizon glowed faintly when I stepped out, the first light of dawn brushing the frost in pale gold and pink. The field lay still, empty, and immense, as if the night had never existed. My boots sank slightly into the icy grass, the sound muted under the hush of early morning. Each breath hung in the cold air, clouding and dissolving quickly. I could almost hear the field exhale with me, waiting, patient, silent. The tin box remained half-buried, its weight less pressing than the memory of labor and discovery. I paused and looked around. Frost-coated stalks sparkled in the sunlight, bending gently under their own frozen weight. Shadows stretched long, leaning over the uneven ground. The field seemed ordinary, yet different, softer somehow, filled with echoes that only morning could coax out. I reached into my pocket and pulled a small token, and now a folded scrap of cloth my grandfather had once used to wipe his hands when carving wood. It was insignificant, almost nothing, but it carried him in ways the gold never could. I knelt, pressing the cloth gently into the soil near the spot where I had found the treasure. My fingers lingered, brushing against frost, remembering the cold bites of early mornings and the rhythm of digging. I thought of him, quiet, deliberate, patient, always waiting for someone to understand without asking outright. The sun rose slowly behind the distant trees. Freestol, said Padkash. Soft light spilling across the field and warming my shoulders despite the lingering frost. I thought of the weeks spent following his letter's instructions, of trudging through snow, feeling hesitation, curiosity, and sometimes fear. The field had not given itself up easily. Every scoop of earth, every frost-crusted mound had been a puzzle, a story, a whisper from the past. And now, with the dawn stretching across the frozen expanse, I understood something deeper. This place had never been about gold alone. I stood and surveyed the field, letting my eyes drift over the contours and shadows. Memories rose unbidden, my childhood laughter, snowball fights along these same mounds, evenings when he would sit silently beside me, teaching without words, letting me discover the lesson in the doing. Every inch of this field felt layered with memory, with presence, with quiet expectation. I realized that he had left me more than a treasure. He had left me a conversation across time. I breathed slowly, letting the crisp morning air fill my lungs, and felt gratitude settle over me like the first warmth of sun on my back. The tin box gleamed faintly, cold and unyielding, but it no longer mattered as much. The bridge between past and present, memory and discovery, was real. I could touch it, walk across it, feel him in it, were inter hay torn. He had trusted me to find it, not merely to uncover gold, but to recognize patience, courage, and care, the real inheritance he had always intended. The wind whispered softly through the trees, brushing against my cheeks and ruffling the edges of my coat. It carried a scent of frost, of earth waking, and of quiet endings that feel like beginnings. I knelt once more beside the tin, not to move it, not to claim it again, but Ignalius berries and Talfors, but to acknowledge it, to acknowledge him. My hands hovered over the metal, then rested lightly. I felt both closure and continuation, a paradox I could only accept, not resolve. Daquant. I let the token lie where it fell, imagining him kneeling here, seeing me, seeing the respect and attention in my gesture. I wondered if he had meant for others to discover it after me, if the field itself was a test of hearts, of patience, of willingness to honor the past without forcing it. The thought made me smile softly, a private understanding shared with a man long gone. I began to walk slowly toward the edge of the field, boots crunching on frost, tracing a path through the snow I had made days before. The sun climbed higher, scattering shadows and painting the ground with gold. Every step felt deliberate, ceremonial even, as though leaving this space required acknowledgement and intention. I glanced back once, seeing the tin box, the frost, the tiny cloth token. The field seemed to nod, a quiet approval in its stillness. I remembered the letters, the digging, the confrontation with family, the nights by the fire, and the reflections on understanding. All of it had led to this, not a sense of ownership over gold, but a feeling of alignment with something larger, something he had quietly built into my life. The story had never been about possession, only participation, and in that realization I felt a stillness that was nearly holy in its calm. The air smelled faintly of thawing snow and distant pine. Birds called somewhere I could not see, their voices small but insistent. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, feeling a pulse of gratitude and recognition settle into my chest. The tin box was here, yes, but the true treasure, patience, courage, memory, and connection, had already been claimed. It was something no one could take, and nothing could diminish. I walked the perimeter once more, as if tracing invisible lines between moments, the winter field, the shovel, the frost, the gold, the candlelit nights, the letters. Each step was both a farewell and a promise. I whispered a quiet thank you, not expecting an answer, but knowing one would come in echoes, in lessons, in the faint warmth of memory. The sun rose fully now, spilling light across the landscape. Frost glimmered like scattered diamonds. I turned back one last time, seeing the field as it was meant to be seen, serene, patient, full of secrets that would outlast me, full of whispers waiting for the right heart to listen. I felt a weight lift, not the weight of material treasure, but the weight of understanding, of connection, of time, held in patience and care. I stepped forward, leaving the field behind, yet carrying it with me. The tin box remained, silent and waiting, and so did the lessons, etched into the air, the soil, and my heart. I had uncovered something he meant me to find, and perhaps, just perhaps, I had glimpsed the deeper truth of his life. The dawn stretched ahead, promising more questions, more reflection, and the quiet knowledge that some treasures are measured not in gold, but in what they leave behind in hearts willing to understand. The wind lifted, brushing past my face, carrying the faintest echo of laughter, of lessons unspoken, of love given in silence. I let it go, letting the field hold its secrets, knowing I would return in memory, in reflection, in quiet gratitude. The day was just beginning, but I had already found what mattered most.